We're excited that you've all, been able to join us tonight. This webinar is the first in a series of programs that will look forward to planning for life in southeastern Vermont post-pandemic. Tonight's presentation is going to lay the groundwork for communities who are looking to revitalize and move forward beyond the pandemic. We hope to provide you with opportunities in the upcoming year to help all of our towns as they consider moving forward. And we hope that you'll bring the information that you learn here today back to your communities and share it with others. Of course, the Windham Regional Commission, is here to help in any ways that we can, and we'd welcome your feedback on that as well, on ways that we can best help move the region forward. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Susan Westa. I'm the Community Development Lead and Senior Planner with the Windham Regional Commission. We also have Chris Campany, our Executive Director. Chris, you want to raise your hand on the call today? And we have a number of our staff too, our Assistant Director, John Bennett, Colin Bratton, our new Transportation Planner, and Margot Gia, who you can't see her face right now, but she's hiding under the Windham Regional label. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I would like to just get a couple Zoom tips. Most importantly, please keep yourself muted. If your connection is unstable, you might want to consider turning your video off during the presentation. But most importantly, if you're not talking, keep yourself muted. It's the best way we have to really minimize those distractions. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I will monitor that and give those questions to Tripp after his presentation. Of course, you can also raise your hands, but I might not, catch everyone that way. And a reminder that we are recording tonight's meeting. It will be posted on our website, so if you'd like to share it with others afterwards, feel free to do that as well. And with that, I would like to introduce Tripp Muldrow, who is a principal with the firm Arnett Muldrow and Associates from Greenville, South Carolina. Tripp is a graduate of Clemson University with a master's degree in city and regional planning. He started his career working in that city's economic development department. And over his career, he's worked on downtown revitalization, branding, marketing, and tourism development projects around the country. I worked with him when I was at the Connecticut Main Street Center on a project designed to help downtown businesses in the community of Sandy Hook after the tragedy there. Tripp's firm has really evolved a specialty niche in downtown economic development and community marketing. He's a frequent speaker at national and state conferences, and he's also very familiar with Vermont. Tripp has worked in at least 15 communities in Vermont over the last 15 years, and he authored the Design Toolkit for Vermont's designated downtowns and village centers in 2015. Tonight, Tripp is going to present for about a half an hour, and then we have about a half an hour for questions and discussion. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tripp.
Great. Thank you so much, Sue. It's a real honor to talk to you all this evening. I may not even go 30 minutes because I think sometimes what's best is to do the Q&A and learn from you on some of what you're facing and what you're dealing with right now. I think as a prelude, I just want to tell everyone in Vermont, I miss the Green Mountain State greatly, especially during this time. My last trip up was to Fairleigh, Vermont in January of 2020, right before, the March meltdown. So I wish I could be up there. And I think it is important to point out as I talk through some of these things, Vermont has a very unique situation in the United States. For those of you who may not be native Vermonters and come from other areas, the state of Vermont has probably some of the more profound and impactful programs for community vitality than any state in the United States of America. And so that's really where I want to start, and is with and I think I don't know everyone in the audience, so what I hope to do is not reinforce, some, I mean, hopefully I can reinforce some things you already know, and then add some things that may be new information. So the state of Vermont does have the downtown and village center designation program. And unlike almost any other state, what Vermont does is actually tie real tangible benefits to designated village centers and to designated downtowns. Vermont also participates in the National Main Street program, which is a time-tested program of downtown and community vitality. And it's been around now since the early 80s. Um, what's happening now at the state level in Vermont and what's happening nationally is what we call, and I want to speak to this through the Main Street and the downtown designation kind of program, is a really big pivot from the emergency response of crisis responding. And believe me, we're used to crisis responding. So Sue mentioned Sandy Hook. But in Vermont, we worked in 8 communities, including Wilmington and Brattleboro in the Windham region, post Irene, where, there's some time where you're dealing with the crisis, and then there's time when you're dealing with what we call recovery. And one of the things I'm talking about nationally right now is that we must move from crisis mode to recovery mode. Because frankly, our sanity is not going to last much longer if we maintain crisis mode. And so as we move toward recovery, y'all probably are aware of some of the things that are happening at the state as far as funding and special programs for communities across the state and keeping dollars in the state. The governor did direct the community, and I get the initials wrong because they've changed. D
ECCD.
Thank you, ACCD. They were not always ACCD. Uh, Directed ACCD to actually come up with a program of incentives to locally to reinforce village center designation and downtown designation, and also partner with state tourism on some local promotion for inside the state tourism. So all that's really underway. The last time I checked, which was probably about 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago, I think everything was pretty much moving through the legislature, and probably at this point it's been approved. I see Chris nodding and affirmation there. So that's really a robust program. If you are a village center or a designated downtown, you're really sitting in an advantageous point. Is very much worthwhile to consider the requirements for becoming designated in the state, and working with ACCD and the Windham Regional Commission on pursuing that status. So I'm going to kind of set that aside for a second too, because I'm one of these folks that, while I've been immersed in the Main Street world and understand the Main Street model, and let me touch on that one final kind of piece of the Main Street model, is that it does focus on 4 key areas: design, promotion and communication, economic vitality, and organization. And so that's really the 4 elements that drive this, very much a grassroots effort. And again, in most states, these programs are scratching and pawing for recognition. In Vermont, you actually have official recognition at the state level and support through state government. We've seen other really creative models from a community development standpoint. And you do have enabling legislation in the state for community development corporations or economic development corporations that kind of function however you want to craft them. Now, if you go that corporation route, there are kind of statutory requirements you have to meet in order to kind of comply, but there are also benefits that afford you from being a partner. This typically works in a community where the local government, whether it's a town government, and I know y'all's situation is different, where you have towns, and then sometimes you have your village centers that are within the towns. Brattleboro itself is unique in that in most states it would be a city, but it's a town. So I'm not even sure. I don't think you have a city within your region, do you? I could be
Nope.
wrong. Yeah, I didn't think you did. And so with so few cities in the state, your town governments, what we see with those development corporations, it really doesn't matter what type of government, it does give some flexibility in how they work in public-private partnerships. And so that's something that's very much worth looking into. And they shift between kind of the community development focus to the economic development focus. I, as a planner and an economic developer, don't view those as different too much. If you're making your community vital and successful, then you're also looking at good, sound economic development principles. Um, One of the things we know and understand is happening in your region, and it's actually something that's been talked about for as long as I've been working in the state of Vermont, is how does a state that has been declining in population and increasing in age recruit people to move where the quality of life is really in a class by itself, exceptionally good quality of life, and also thrive in that place. And so as I talk about whether it's Main Street or community and economic development corporations, your area is actually seeing, and the pandemic, as I understand, is driving people who may have had a second home, who may have vacationed, or may have, that they're from Boston or New York or wherever, and they're settling in the community. And there's actually been waves of this in Vermont for generations. There was an influx of people in the late 60s and early 70s. Then there was really an influx kind of prior to the recession in 2008. And so we've seen some waves of this, but it hasn't quite happened the same way we're seeing it, the rapid way we're seeing it right now during the pandemic. I'm sorry, you can tell that I'm going down little pathways and different roads here. The other thing that we've seen is just really cool informal alliances. And those have been some of the most effective and nimble ways for groups to get together and advocate and work together for the betterment of their community. And so while you can wrap your hand or tie into the Main Street program or actually have a formal organization, those informal groups are really the first step that we see in almost every community. It's just people who are interested in making the place better, organizing and developing a committee with a set of goals and a plan to kind of move forward. One of the things we see, and I've seen this throughout my career, in high growth areas where you have an influx of people, there's this natural friction that occurs between those who've been here and those who've come here. And so when those groups get together, having cross representation among the different, whether it's a new group of people or people who've been there for generations, is critically important. This work I did in Fairleigh, and the reason I talk about Fairleigh is kind of fresh in my mind. We're talking about a town of 800 people on the Connecticut River, and we really do have a mix of people that are generational in the community and people who have relocated to the community. And they're actually at the very beginning of forming an alliance. What was happening in Fairleigh, and we see this happen in small communities all the time, is we have a town government that for a long time actually was very, very disengaged. In fact, they were kind of an for lack of a better term, they were keep your hands off, don't touch anything. We're just here to run the government at the absolute bare minimum. We had a resort, Fairleigh has a resort, the Lake Maury Resort, which is one of these just well-known Vermont destinations with a lake and hotel and self-catering, the classic Vermont resort. And then we have the Aloha Foundation, which runs camps that just bring kids just through the community all summer long. And when we were doing the work there, one of the things that was stunning to me is that, and the town has gone through a change, their new elected officials are much more engaged in community vitality. Never before had the Lake Maury Resort, is it Maury? Morley? The resort, yes, the resort, the town government, and the Aloha Foundation had never sat in the room together to talk about anything. And that is the kind of just stunning, like I kind of walked out of the meeting like, oh my gosh. And so really one of our key recommendations was, guys, what you have between these three critical partners, then you throw in your school, your library, and your businesses, is a powerhouse of what you can get done when you think about those strategic partnerships. And so they're actually forming that informal group now. They are a designated village center, but they're actually pursuing money through VTrans. They've done some experimental work as far as improvements to deal with COVID to keep businesses alive. And they did this kind of ad hoc, working in the street. And they're actually leveraging that to pursue additional funding as they move ahead. The other thing that we've seen in communities, and I had the privilege of working in a little town, I think Chris will know this one, of Eupora, Mississippi. It's a town of about 650 people. The town was, for all practical purposes, what you would characterize as a down and out community. They ended up forming an investment group of 7 different citizens. One was an architect, one was a lawyer, one was an accountant, the other was a real estate person, the others, had cash money. And they began an investment group to buy buildings, restore them, and populate those buildings with locally owned businesses, recognizing that there was not a human, not an investment, no angel, coming in, or no knight on a white horse riding in that was going to come in and do that kind of work. And so they were doing it themselves. Today, I think they've done about 15 renovations. Many of these are humble buildings that they're populating with locally owned shops and restaurants to serve their community. And that is done through basically strong friendships of people and a very healthy respect for, because these are professionals that kind of grew up there, went away, some came back. They were very sensitive to not being viewed as, oh, look what they're doing. It was kind of, look what we're doing together and getting that sensibility from the community itself.
A yard sale off Kilimanjaro, and she's thinking, wow, I married an idiot.
Gary, can you mute yourself?
You think it's going to be effective?
I think it says the president. And
Yes, working on it.
Thank you.
I was like, I thought that might be a question. I didn't think Kilimanjaro was in southern Vermont.
Not that we know of.
Yeah. Finally, the thing that we've seen that's also been really cool, and Gretchen, I think of you often when I think of this, in Wilmington, was really an alliance of different partners that came together. And we've seen this happen in other places, whether it was a chamber, a downtown group, a group of just active citizens, and the government really just teaming up and creating an alliance. So I've actually worked in several communities where they actually kind of lumped it all together into one with kind of a multifaceted purpose. So one group would be dedicated to economic vitality. The other group would be dedicated to, facing things like affordability, housing, diversity. Another group would be looking at things like education and healthcare and those kind of pieces. And that team was really working through the community development process. The best groups I've seen in the country have been the ones that, and y'all may have heard of the Heart and Soul, the Orton Family Foundation, which is based in Vermont. It was founded by Lyman Orton, who started the Vermont Country Store. Their mantra includes three things, and I kind of take these with me wherever I go. Is whenever we're looking at community vitality or economic development, they talk about focusing on the long game. So, what's the long-term vision that we have for this community? Because if we don't look at that long-term vision, sometimes the tyranny of the present, whatever it is, the present fight against a new development, the present, reaction to a disaster, all those need to be viewed through the lens of the long game. The second is focus on what matters. And so, does this matter? Does this really matter? And the only way to figure out what really matters is to involve everyone, which is the third piece of this. And involving everyone can be a very big challenge, because traditionally the way my profession has done things is we have what's called stakeholders, and we involve the stakeholders. Well, more often than not, the stakeholders are the people who hold the stake. And it's not the people who necessarily have a voice who get engaged when we talk about, quote, stakeholders. So are you reaching out and talking to communities members that are maybe grossly underrepresented? They never get asked to sit at the table. Maybe that group is, being from the South, typically what we're dealing with is racial minorities. In other places, we're dealing with socioeconomic strata where we're not able to reach out and touch those folks who don't have the means to show up to that evening meeting because they're working two jobs. That could also be people who are just maybe a bit afraid to speak out. So it may be people in recovery, or people who, maybe the LGBTQ community. So how are we making sure that every voice is kind of treated equally? And I'm just wrapping up work over the past 7 days in a community about 30 miles away, Spartanburg. It's a bigger city. Their entire process, every recommendation, everything we're doing, we are running through the lens of social equity. Is it equitable? Is this recommendation something that's going to present opportunities for everyone in the community? And that's the kind of thing that really catches people's imagination, and you can really build a solid plan around. And so the models are really almost limitless. I know that I've talked about 30 minutes. I do best in Q&A. And so what I'd love to hear from you, because you're all coming at this from different communities, different positions, different life experiences. What are you looking at? What are some of the challenges you're facing? What are some of the opportunities? And then maybe some things that, hey, you touched on this, but you didn't go far enough. I don't even know what you're talking about, Tripp. So feel free. It's kind of your meeting. And I do notice that the Main Street communities, I guess that's linked to the Main Street communities that was posted by the
it's the Mississippi Main Street program. It talks about Eupora and Newton.
Okay, great, fantastic.
Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat box, but if anybody has any, would like to just raise your hand. I think I have everyone on one screen here, so Would anyone like to start?
Yes.
Sharon. Get unmute yourself. There
I'll
you
just
go.
take a little stab. We're very happy to be here from the town of Londonderry. I'm the Planning Commission Chair right now, and there are several other members of the Planning Commission attending, and we have embarked on a revitalization effort about a year ago before COVID, and now we're dealing with it during COVID, trying to keep things moving. We've opened many of the doors that you mentioned in the sense of we have some working groups, including stakeholders that don't include all those groups that you mentioned. We have taken a survey in the community that was as broad as we could make it at the time to find out from the general population, we hope, what's missing and what's great about our place and our small town of about 1,700 people. Based community, and now I just can't even really guess, over more than double probably that with newcomers. And we have been working diligently with the Regional Planning Commission and formed working groups, economic vitality, Main Street, communications and connectivity, and branding and recreation, groups of interest with volunteers. We have about 50 some odd people engaged actively. So things are happening, but we're coming to a place where it feels like it's kind of messy. There's just a lot of stuff going on, and there's some angst about, are we ever going to get organized enough to, go forward and really make things happen? We did just apply. We do have we do have 2 designated village centers, and we did just apply for a municipal planning grant through ACCD for a Main Street master plan for the North Village designated Main Street, and a study and a master plan. That wouldn't happen for a year. We've also engaged with the Rural Vermont Council on Rural Development, who has agreed to help us with public engagement.
Good.
And during this gap between having made an application for the Main Street plan and receiving notice in December, perhaps, that we're approved for that grant. So we're trying to stay busy, but I think the angst is like not having like a schedule where everything falls into place, and for some not having, a lot of professional outside assistance, as in consulting, to steer us and make sure we spend our time and money in the right place and go there. So that's a lot. I'm going to stop talking and see if I have spurred any advice you could give us.
So I love everything you just shared. And I think the first thing to share back to you all is take a deep breath and pat yourself on the back, and don't be so hard on yourself. What COVID has done to us, and I'm dealing with this too. I'm working with a community right now where, like, we've had so many quote restarts, because just when we think the committee's all gelled together, we've got someone who moved to the community and then they decided to move away, or someone got busy, or someone's loved one got sick, or whatever else. And so I think sometimes, and you're talking to a former planning commissioner as well. And so as a commission taking this on, I think there's kudos to you, because you do have that formal relationship with the RPC and the chance to pursue the funding. I think the plan is going to be critical. And the piece that I would advise as you look at the plan, I'm going to give you a couple like consultant inside tips. As a planner who does plans, I'm not selling my work. I'm just telling you that whatever the sticker price is on the plan, that's what the plan will cost. If there's no sticker price on the plan, there's no up end limit on what you're going to be charged. Does that make sense? I mean, and I just say that because, you know, there are plans that come out that are $250,000 plans that still don't have 2 pages of implementation that you can rub together. And so what's important is making sure that in your planning process, and I'm optimistic that you will be awarded your grant, that you're including the elements that you want included, and don't feel like it just needs to be limited to, say, public streets or public infrastructure. If you want branding, have branding. If you want private sector economic development opportunities, include it. If you want housing pressure issues or affordable housing addressed, include it. Make sure those things are done no matter what your budget is, because you can get a good plan at a very reasonable price. The part about having the plan, what it does for you all, to put all this legwork in, is I view this, and a lot of my colleagues view it, our process is a knitting process. So we take all the good work that's been done and try and knit it together into a plan that makes sense with solid implementation. And so that's really what we're trying to do when we take it where you're taking it. So if you're going to get your answer in December, then, you know, your chance of kind of moving ahead next year is probably right on target. I am like a lot of y'all where, you know, there are days where I'm like, I'm just treading water. We've done all this, but we can't make that next level. But you're dealing with what everybody's dealing with right now. So I just want to congratulate you on what you've done up to this point.
Tripp, I do have a question here in the chat box.
Yes.
That is, in your experience, what is the most effective way to get input and buy-in from all segments of the population?
So that's a really, really important question. One of the things that, because, you know, the surveys are the surveys. And so if you don't get the survey, then you're not engaged. Now, I'm working in a little town in Washington now called Kittitas. It's about, again, you can tell I have a pattern of working in a little place. This is about 900 people. And we ended up having 450 responses to our survey. That's a 50% response rate.
Wow.
That was just like, holy cow. So the data that we had was really engaging. But the most important thing that you know, we're learning is we have to take it to them. And so in prior work, some of the things that I've done, some of the things that we've done, and by we, colleagues and others, is, are you taking it to the nursing home? Are you taking it to the recovery house? Are you taking the survey to not just the principal of the high school and student council? Are you taking it to the social studies teacher who's teaching every student? Did a work in Canada with middle school students and actually showed them how to fill out the survey and their classes. And we had a balloon of middle school students, and then we had a balloon of parents, because their homework assignment was to go home and have their parents do it too. And so those are the kind of things where you try to involve as many as you can. We never get everyone.
And Tripp,
But go ahead.
Tripp, I mean, it's also important that, I mean, when you say buy-in, you know, you're not taking them the already baked cake. You're asking them what kind of cake do they want, and do they want to participate in the process of baking the cake. You're not taking everything baked and hope everybody is going to agree to it, right? I mean, that. Right.
And then a lot of what I try and do when I'm doing this work is try and get relative importance, because when you're doing your questions and you're asking the kind of, is sometimes we ask leading questions that try and get us what we want anyway. But if we're asking relative questions, then you can kind of get relative importance. So, you know, oftentimes my questions are things like, you know, a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree, you know, what's this, and finally, I think the other thing that we're dealing with right now is it's just picking up the dang phone and calling people. And I know that sounds corny, and just asking the qualitative questions. One of the things that y'all might consider on gathering information is when you're asking qualitative questions, make sure that you're sort of taking some notes. And then the words that come out end up being things that you can gather in quantifiable data. It seems qualified data at first, but after several phone calls where people say over and over again, I don't know, the park downtown, the park downtown, the park downtown, the park downtown. Well, that ends up being something that kind of rises to the top, even just by asking a general question. I see something, we're considered forming a 501c to help. I would tell you that I believe that's a really important piece to do, is a 501c. They're not terribly hard to form. And there's a bit more freedom and C3 status than there used to be, but you may also want to talk with counsel, local attorney on C4 or C6 alongside your C3. And sometimes what that does is it just builds it ends up being the same board and they're DBAing, you know, on top of each other. But the C3 is probably the good first step. You don't have to go and do all the different categories at first.
Does anyone else have anything?
I'm reading some of the
Elsie?
comments.
So
Hey,
I
Elsie.
was the one that asked the question about the 501c3 and the enabling legislation. I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in what you had to say about the investor groups. Those are the two pieces that we're struggling with or sort of envisioning here in Londonderry as potential next steps. And I just wanted to get your suggestions for how we might go about also forming an investor group.
Great question. So thanks for posting that link that includes Upora. One of the things that we're actually seeing now, and it's kind of taken forever to get there, and I'm going to have to look it up, so bear with me, is the Jobs Act. This was back during the Obama administration. The Jobs Act lifted the requirements for qualified investors to be part of, you know, of investing of these kind of groups. Does that make sense? So the whole crowdfunding idea and minimum investment, and you are in the state that pioneered community supported enterprise and community supported programs like this. There's no state with more experience than Vermont on community supported enterprise. I do think that it's worth looking into, and I'm calling this up on the web as we talk, a group called the Incremental Development Alliance.
Is that Incremental Development Alliance?
Correct. The Incremental Development Alliance is a group of people who, their website, I'm going to post it.
So Tripp, you should know that our local development organization, Brattleboro Development Corporation, it has already been talking to the incremental development folks. And I believe they are working on some educational programs and even, I think, some technical assistance with Rockingham. Is that correct, Gary?
Yes, we're contracting with them for a 4-month program that has workshops, clinics for stakeholders. We kind of springboarded off a Vermont Council on Rural Development community visit. One of our task forces was building redevelopment. And the task force got hung up with the second meeting was right when COVID shut everything down and we lost some momentum, and this is really jump starting us.
Great.
So great organization. We were really inspired. A bunch of us got on a call with the executive director there, and they're brilliant and have outlined a great program. Yeah.
Gary, it's hard not to get excited about them when you talk about them and their energy.
Yes, exactly.
And
yeah.
Some of my favorite people, Bernice Radley and Buffalo. I mean, she's just a rock star. And so I think this might be, and Sue, you talked about this maybe being an ongoing thing. It might be really cool to partner with the Brattleboro. I know I get y'all's initials wrong all the time.
Right. BDCC.
BDCC. To partner with BDCC to have incremental development do a session, because and then y'all, I'm going to point you to another place. Sorry. If y'all go to proudplaces.com, and then if you're on Facebook, Downtown Happy Hour, I'm typing these in because the Incremental Develop Alliance and some of their members have been doing some incredible session on women, small developers. And they've been doing it like once every month, and it's all women who are doing incremental development, which I just think is fantastic. And their experience is just, anyone could learn from it. So.
Tripp, I posted the reason. So for when folk here is talking about posting things, if you go to the chat, you'll see that if at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little icon that says chat. You can click on that. You'll see those links. One of the reasons I posted, because a lot of people know about them, it's a link to an article in Southern Living magazine about how Laurel, Mississippi, not to go back to Mississippi again, but how actually the show that's on HGTV called Hometown, and it features a couple who are one by one redeveloping homes as people are coming into the town to reinvest. It tells the background of that. An important point that they make is they did that because they wanted to invest in their own community and invest in themselves. Too often times when you talk about community development, I can't tell you how many times I've been in the conversation where they're trying to appeal to somebody who's not there right now, instead of doing it for themselves. And so they're trying to appeal to the tourist or the people they want to move there. But what you find is if you actually invest in it for yourselves, then it's authentic, it's real, it's rooted investment. Bellows Falls has done just frankly a fantastic job with this for a couple of decades now, and others of you have too. But I posted that because it just kind of gives you the background of how, frankly, kind of an incremental development process ultimately turned into a nationwide television program featuring two people who are involved in it. And one other piece of this is that, you know, I've found, I came here about 10 years ago, and New England is incredibly insular, and Vermont is particularly insular. It really does help to look at these resources that Tripp's talking about, to look at, you know, beyond, to the world beyond, about what all is happening out there, because there's a lot of great examples in Vermont. And if you add to that the examples of what's happening in the rest of the world, there's a lot of things that we can learn about, and we can always try to harness, you know, reach out to us. We can bring more people in to kind of talk to you about what's happened in other parts of the world too.
And I couldn't agree more. I think the other thing though about being, and I'm going to post the link that Preservation Trust has for CSEs, because I think that's a good one. And a lot of things about Vermont being insular that's interesting though is y'all, sometimes I'm surprised that y'all are doing everything the right way and don't promote it enough. Does that make sense? Like, there are models that I'm screaming to other states, like, you should look at Vermont. Oh my gosh, you know, like community supported enterprises. And then just the relationship between your elected officials, your local officials, and getting things done at the legislative level and the bureaucratic level. I mean, the hoops we have to go through in other states are just mind-blowing. And the fact that a few good people can come together in Vermont and set up a meeting and, in Montpelier and get something done is just phenomenal, just phenomenal. So I always like to remind folks how good you have it sometimes, because sometimes you do. I'm guilty of this myself. I get stuck in the cycle of woe is me, it's going too slow. And I think of this too. I'm from South Carolina, and we're a very conservative state, but as far as incentives for community vitality, we clean North Carolina's clock. We provide more for communities in our state than our state to the north. And so I'm always reminding South Carolinians, don't ever forget it, all these things that we're fortunate to have.
That's a really good point. Do we have any more questions? Oh, I see one down here, I believe. Are there
Oh, I
any
love that.
examples of residents or business owner experiences with before and after revitalization in terms of tax base? Some people will tend to fear taxes going up.
That's a really good point, and y'all may want to chime in on it from Windham Regional as well. There's always fear of that. I think for me, putting that relative thing in perspective. So let me just use an example. If you're having successful commercial development that attracts people and retains your dollars in your local community, what it does tend to do is drive down the tax base of residents, so the residents aren't paying that undue burden. And that's why community and economic development are important at that community level, because if you can take more of the burden off the residents and place it in that commercial bucket, that's going to help everyone overall. I'm going to throw another one on the table that's a little wild. Vermont has in the past worked with tax increment financing. And basically what that does is when new development happens or revitalization happens and taxes incrementally go up, that increment's dedicated to improvements within the community or within the designated area rather than getting lost in a general fund kind of thing. I believe tax increment is closed off right now in Vermont, but I have every reason to believe that it might open back up again. And let me set that aside for a second. As you all work with local governments, even in spite of not having state legislation that enables tax increment, the idea of synthetic tax increment, where you basically, as a matter of policy, saying that in this district, as we create value, we're going to dedicate that increment to continuing improvement in that area. Or I'm going to take another example, and this one's going to make heads roll, I know, because I had to deal with this in Fairleigh. So Fairleigh had a Dollar General come in. I know everyone's like gasping right now about that. If I were advising them prior to Dollar General coming in, I would have said, take that incremental investment, certainly allow some of it to allow your town to function better because you're going to get more revenue, but dedicate some to downtown vitality so that you're not just having a quote parasite come in and take. Now, I can go off on a real market tangent on the pros and cons of these kind of stores. I can agree that y'all have the best, prettiest ones, but they're like cockroaches. So, and I know they're angling hard in the Green Mountain State to get on the ground.
Anyone else? Yeah, Sharon again.
Just a quick question this time. Do you have any advice or models for, strategic or innovative ways to revitalize a main street that's almost entirely within a flood zone?
Oh, yes. So you're in the state that's dealing with this as a result of Irene, probably more than anyone else. And I think Gretchen,
And
she's on this
longer.
meeting. Right. Yeah. And I'm going to have to kick that one up to ACCD. It's one that we're dealing with everywhere. There's a professor who did a great study in, oh my gosh, now I'm not going to think of the name, the military university in the northern part. I want to say Northfield, Norwich. Just on the development patterns in Vermont and how all of your towns are vulnerable because of your development patterns there. We actually worked in Brandon to raise buildings, including their town hall, up out of the zone, and use some grant money from FEMA through HUD to get that done. You're talking about a real bear of an issue. And of course, y'all know Wilmington really did get hammered during Irene.
So did we.
Yeah, I wish I had better, more solid answers, but I mean, it's one where everyone's kind of dealing with it in their own specific way.
Tripp, I think part of it is actually recognizing and owning the risks, right? I mean, as opposed to kind of whistling past the graveyard, actually recognizing that there are flood and fluvial erosion risks, and then developing accordingly in a way that improves resilience.
And Gretchen,
Ellicott City, Maryland is a great example. They've had 2,000 or 3,000 year storms in the last few years, and their struggles about how to deal with their downtown development.
Well, I've been working Ellicott City plan as the economic development planner for 4 years through both of the 2,000-year floods. Ultimately, they're going to demolish several buildings down in the floodway. And then they made the decision to build a multi-million dollar tunnel to funnel water down underneath the town. It's extremely controversial, but that plan is nearing completion, and there's tons of articles about Ellicott City. Gretchen, I don't want to put you on the spot, but in Wilmington, if I recall correctly, I think the plan we wrote for y'all during Irene probably had some of the better flood-proofing recommendations than probably any of the other 8 that we wrote. I'll have to dig that up and see if I can find it.
Yeah, I have it. There was a bit, there wasn't a lot actually.
Okay. It may have been another.
Yeah, I think it was probably Brandon when you worked with them.
Okay.
But yeah, it really does come down to, flood insurance, making sure that, people do that. And as they're redeveloping, making sure that they're, abiding by, I mean, there's so many rules, that you could, from the electrical and, the heating systems and everything go above the BFE. So, and, everybody, as they've been renovating in Wilmington, have been doing that, which is good.
Right.
Well, Tripp, it's 6:56, and I think you have to leave in a minute or so.
Well, I hope this was to some degree helpful to you all. I know it was a bit of a ramble, and I hope you'll take advantage of the resources on the link. And please, I want to get there as soon as possible, so keep me posted, and I'll be monitoring phase levels. But I guess we need to get through this rough winter first.
Yeah.
So y'all hang in there. You're doing a great job in Vermont. You're the envy of the nation, even though the nation doesn't really know how much they should be envying you right now. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Tripp.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.